they want to create a whites-only society. I think that there's this new wave of like young, quite online, very racist people who are trying to launder their ideas in the mainstream, and I think unfortunately they're having quite a lot of success. There are very sophisticated efforts now by far-right activists to try and expand and try and prey on the vulnerabilities of young people.
Harry Shukman, hello, welcome back to PoliticsJOE.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. For those who didn't catch your last conversation with me that we had, tell us who you are and what you do.
It's great to be back. My name's Harry Shukman. I'm a researcher at Hope Not Hate, and I've just finished a year undercover in the British far right. I've written a book about it called Year of the Rat, and as part of the investigations that we were doing at Hope Not Hate, we looked at one group in particular, and we've just published a report about them. They're called the Basketweavers, and they are the name is chosen to avoid scrutiny from the media, from anti-fascists, from the police even, and actually they've been very effective at doing that because although they've been set up for about 4 years now, they've avoided any attention until now.
Where does the name come from?
The name is deliberately innocuous.
Yeah.
It's meant to avoid scrutiny. There are a lot of far-right groups out there that are quite explicitly...
It's like Achtung,
extreme-
I am a Nazi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one is thinking about National Action or the Homeland Party and is any doubt about what that group is about.
Yes.
But Basketweavers, that is meant to be a veil over what they do. And it's chosen as this kind of deliberately quite funny kind of nonsense name.
The Hope Not Hate report describes them as, quote, clean-cut, well-educated and professionally successful. How does that challenge maybe a preconception or maybe what I would call like a stereotype about the far right?
Yeah, a lot of people might justifiably think that if you're in the far right, you're kind of an EDL, lagered up skinhead yelling at Muslims. But what we really try and get across with our work at Hope Not Hate is that the far right is way bigger than that, and the Basketweavers might not fit the stereotypical mold, but they have this kind of quite professional, middle-class vibe about them. A lot of their members are a little bit younger than your typical kind of street activist. Some of them are still at university. Some of them have recently graduated. But yeah, been to university, working in jobs in finance, IT, civil service. And although that's not, that's a broad picture. And they really see themselves as part of this intellectual elite. They have these quite scholarly pretensions. They swap books on fascist philosophy, and they watch these marathon live streams on white nationalism, and they see themselves as certainly different and kind of even above your more street activisty types in a hierarchy.
Got you. How did you first come across them? What made you want to include them in your book?
Yeah, my colleague Patrick Hermansen, he found them, and they were promoted in late 2022 by these far-right influencers, and they did these quite weird and cryptic videos in which they would hold up a woven basket and talk about how, individually the strands of this basket are weak, but together they're strong, and said that there was this new kind of community group, a new group that was apolitical, which is curious if they're being promoted by white nationalists, far-right activists. The chance of this group being what they say it is pretty low. And there would be a link to a Discord server on the social media messaging app, and you could join and undergo like a vetting process. They'd ask you political questions. And today they want to ask about, what do you think about January 6th? What do you think about COVID? What do you think about Israel-Palestine? And what they're looking for are the kind of answers that are would put you in the group of the dissident right, as they like to call it, this far right with intellectual ambitions. And Patrick got us through this process under using a pseudonym of Chris, and then we were in. We developed a backstory for myself, and we joined the first meeting, which was at a pub not far away from here, the Cross Keys, which is a massive spoons near a Bank tube station. And as far as I saw, they met up there. They're still meeting up there, according to their most recent calendar, in a room at the top of the back, or so beyond the kind of main hall, past all the city boys.
Yeah.
They're just in there twice a week. So there's this social aspect to what they do. They meet up in the pub, they go to art galleries, they go to films, they go on hikes in Kent, they go to barbecues at each other's houses. So on one level, it's a community thing, but it has these political goals. They want to create this new intellectual vanguard that when society collapses, they'll be able to sweep to power. That's one part of it. Another is that it's just far-right activism. They go to traditionally, what we would traditionally understand as far-right events. They mingle with activists in really extreme parties and organizations. So it's really just become part of the far-right scene as we understand it today.
Yeah. This is slightly tangential, but
Yeah.
it's something I'm always quite fascinated by, is how the sort of the schism on the far right that Israel-Palestine presents, because you kind of have your classic sort of more neo-Nazi anti-Semite, which is like, pro-Palestinian because they hate Jews, and then this sort of new wave who are pro-Israeli because they hate brown people. And I appreciate I've like grossly oversimplified what's happening there, but I find it always interesting where you sometimes catch like a bit of back and forth between people who think, oh, maybe they're ideological fellow travelers, and one of them will just close something off being like, and of course free Palestine, and you're like, what? You're on that side of it, do you know?
But you're right. There's this confusion over conflicts like Ukraine, Russia as well, where I've seen debates over basically they'll pick the side that they think has either the fewest Muslims or the fewest Jews in it. So Ukraine bad because Zelensky's Jewish, but Russia also bad because they have Chechen Muslims in their army. So
who do we hate the most? Yeah, it's a tough balancing act. Look, so ideologically, what do the Basketweavers believe? Like, what are we talking about here? Is it how far right are we talking? Is it fascistic? Is it white nationalism? Is it anti-democracy? What are the kind of core tenets, core beliefs?
Some of those three things actually I all heard a version of on the very first time I went undercover with them.
Yeah.
Within about 10 minutes of turning up to the Cross Keys, I was hearing about someone mentioned this far-right acronym, the JQ, which stands for the Jewish question. How do we basically get rid of the Jews in Europe? People were expressing support for Patriotic Alternative, which is a white nationalist organization run by a neo-Nazi activist. And they're also quite interested in the anti-democratic ideas expressed by people like Curtis Yarvin. And they broadly see democracy as a sham. They want to create a whites-only society. And they're really interested in the ideas of this super fascist philosopher. That's the term that Julius Evola, this Italian philosopher, used to describe himself. He collaborated with Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy, and they're really interested in his idea of racial stock needing to be pure. So these are all ideas that I heard expressed in the first few minutes, or even the first couple of meetings I went to. Really extreme, putting themselves at by far the most extreme end of the far right scene, certainly towards it. And there is a spread of opinion within it, but these are the prevailing views that I heard.
Can you talk a little bit about the function of irony in this? Because for people who are looking, there's a really good book by Angela Nagle called Kill All Normies, which sort of traces Chan culture, but also leveraging irony to kind of cloak political opinion, or like just I guess the old internet parlance would be just doing it for the bants or whatever, for the lols. But can you talk about the function of kind of memes, irony, pseudonyms, and how it connects to, well, I guess them as an organization, how they organize?
Yeah, absolutely. That book is, I think, really interesting, Kill All Normies. And certainly a lot of the people I met in the Basketweavers are quite, they're very familiar with the Chan culture. A couple of the guys were even regular posters on it.
Mm.
Um, they're very literate in meme culture and would joke to hide some of their ideas. And at some point, you're not really sure where the joke ends and the truth begins.
Mm.
Is one used to cloak the other, as you mentioned. For instance, members would joke about their events that they'd go to as NSDAP adventures, and that's the acronym for Hitler's Nazi Party, and would do Nazi salutes at these events and share pictures of it. And at some point, you got to ask, okay, well, they might be doing it ironically, but
Yeah.
who poses in
How
Hitler
many-
salutes
Yeah,
for fun?
Is it
repeatedly?
Is it after the first one? Like, is it no longer ironic? Once you've done the second one, you're just doing it. You're just doing Nazi salutes
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
And yet, if you are the person to complain about that and say like, "Hey, these guys are doing Hitler salutes," then it looks like you're not kind of getting the joke.
Yeah.
You're the kind of you're the idiot for
Yeah,
complaining.
yeah.
So it can be quite an effective tool.
Yeah, I guess it's like it can introduce a degree of plausible deniability, right?
Yeah.
Because we're just doing it to be funny. We don't actually think it. But like you said, how many times do you say the racist thing or do the fascist salute or Roman salute, whatever it is, by repetition? At some point, it's like this isn't you can say you're doing it to be funny, but at this point, you are just doing the thing.
Yeah,
Right.
and that is part of the conversation, but certainly not all of it is humorous.
Yeah.
I sat in a lot of conversations and went to lectures at which, Jews in no uncertain terms were were insulted, or people spoke about the need to shoot migrants in the English Channel or murder civil servants believed to be pushing progressive policy. So the gags are kind of part of it, but at the same time, you have got these quite extreme expressions. So while some of them do have this kind of humorous edge to what they're doing, the rest of them are pretty serious about it.
Let's talk about some of their conceptual framework, conceptual underpinning. It's really hard to talk about this because I don't want to sound like I'm intellectualizing racism. I guess I'll just call it pseudoscience. But run me through some of the sort of the core beliefs or sort of the ideological framework of what they think.
Yeah. I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Look, the Basketweavers, according to their founder, who's this, he says he's a qualified psychologist, and now he's a far right commentator. He envisioned the Basketweavers as initially like a community group. A refuge for young men who are isolated, who don't really have many mates. But in the same kind of introductory lecture where he laid out the vision for the Basketweavers, he also said it would have a radicalizing element to it. The idea that if you're in person, you can be much more persuadable than if you were just listening to a live stream online or were, following a social media account. So it is meant to get people to come to more extreme beliefs. And they also hope that to basically form this new intellectual community that will one day be able to rule the UK. It's quite far-fetched in that sense because they have this really long-term view. But what they're doing is basically creating what I heard it once described as creating the soil from which far-right projects can emerge.
Right.
So it's basically all about getting them together and seeing what they can build from it.
So how does that move then from a Telegram channel or a Discord chat server or whatever it is into the real world? Have they tried, or do they try? Are they seeking to infiltrate kind of more mainstream conservative spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to give an idea of the size of it, there are about 1,300 Basketweavers in their Discord server today, with another 1,100 in other countries, Europe, US, Canada, Australia, so on. And where I think they're getting quite sinister is when people are in the basket weaving universe, one foot in there and one foot in the mainstream. We've seen people go to basket weaver or affiliated events and write for major newspapers, appear on TV channels. You can have a wild guess at which ones. and,
Imagine my shock. Yeah.
and uh, and I think that there's this new wave of like young, quite online, very racist people who are trying to launder their ideas in the mainstream, and I think that unfortunately they're having quite a lot of success. Um,
Participating in student societies?
yes, some people in the Basque Weaver world have kind of doing that kind of thing.
Mm,
A lot of them are Gen Z, still at university or in the kind of university world. But the Basketweavers is just one part of it.
yeah.
There's this umbrella organization called the Beowulf Foundation, harking back to this mythical hero. Um, and there's the Basket Weavers. There are also projects that are trying to set up financial payments apps to help users who are getting debanked. There are publishing companies hoping to reprint old racist books. And this far right conference network called Scyldings. And this is one of the places where there are some really alarming kind of one foot in, one foot out people who go along to these events, even speak at them, and at the same time in what you would consider a mainstream career.
Yeah. Can you explain to me the sort of the mechanisms for recruitment and who and how? Because is it sort of they join the organization and then they end up in these slightly more mainstream spaces? Are they seeking out people that already have a degree of influence and connection? I don't know, might have at one time attended a student society for a right-wing political party or have written for a newspaper, and then they recruit them into their organ. Like, how does that timeline
I mean, the
work?
size of the organization suggests that there are all kinds of different ways in.
Yeah.
But the main one is this, you see the link, you hear them mentioned in a far right video, and you click through, you undergo the vetting process, and then you're in. You go along to events based on where you are, because it's a chapter-based organization. The London one's the biggest, but there's others, almost in every city in every major city in the UK. And then you ascend kind of through the organization and go to more events. You might take more of like a leading role in your regional chapter. And certainly when I was there were people who were putting on their own kind of meetups, people who wanted to do self-defense, people who wanted to run through educational courses sold by far right leaders, and others who wanted to speak at far right conferences.
If we were to try to maybe like the Arendtian, but maybe just human response of trying to extend a degree of empathy towards people who may find themselves entrapped is probably the wrong word, but let's say perhaps naively or otherwise find themselves involved in a group like this, end up becoming radicalized, but the point from which they started might not necessarily be a point of no return. What are we kind of looking for in these young men? And is it kind of that alienation and grievance that is quite well documented and people talk about when they're talking about, for example, extreme misogyny? What are your kind of the context you're seeing? Is there a common thread between any of these new members, and how could we perhaps try to address that thread before they end up going down this path?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an interesting question, because I often met people who I thought, well, you seem a bit less committed to this than some of the leaders in this group,
Hmm.
the rank and file guys. And certainly I was much more sympathetic for their position, because a lot of them seem to be really, really lonely. I think a lot of what draws them to the Basket Weavers is its offer of community, its offer of mates who are like-minded. You can talk about things that you can't talk about at work, or or in your other friendship circles. And loads of the guys I met, and they're mostly all guys, were expressed, you know, dissatisfaction that they weren't able to get the relationships and friendships out of life that they had expected, that their time at university was really lonely, that they weren't getting along with their parents. I met one guy who was locked out of different rooms in his parents' home because he was constantly arguing with them. There was this one guy who said that he was, he felt really low down on the totem pole of society, is how he put it. He'd been rejected by a lot of people. These are things that really stuck with me actually, and made me feel quite a bit of guilt for going undercover and lying to them that I was someone else. And also, yeah, sympathy that perhaps not all the reasons why they were joining that group were entirely, malicious. Certainly, they were also expressing ideas that you and me would find contemptible. But at the same time, they were there for very, I would think, justifiable reasons. They didn't have many friends. The really tragic thing is that within this group, because the Basketweavers can be really vicious to each other, I don't really think they're going to find the community that they were hoping for. I'd see richer members insult the poorer ones who couldn't afford to attend these really expensive conferences that cost hundreds of pounds. Um, Guys who are a bit more like maladjusted and a bit kind of harder to get on with would not get invited to things, or they'd get blanked by different members. I listened to one really troubling conversation where another member joked about beating him up, like hanging him from the ceiling and using him as a punching bag. Um, and members who are sexually inexperienced would get teased. I don't think that this is like the real safe harbor that they're intending it to be.
Yeah. I get without that sort of toxicity, and also the toxicity of the horrible racism, if it was just guys going hiking in Kent and like going to a Spoons twice a week, you'd be like, so it sounds like a men's group.
Right,
You
right.
know what I
Other
mean?
priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But
Yeah.
I guess that's maybe the thin end of the wedge, right? Is that, and for anyone politically organising, whatever the tilt of their politics is that actually that feeling of belonging is a really powerful thing, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. We all want it.
yeah,
We all want to feel like we matter in the eyes of the people around us, that we have a community that's thinking about us. Loneliness is a big issue in this country. Loads of people in surveys, I don't have the statistics to hand, but, surveys consistently tell us that a lot of young people, young men in particular, don't feel like they have the friends that they expect out of life. And, that is a tragedy. And it's groups like the Basketweavers who are trying to exploit that. That's one of the reasons why I think that they're worthy of being exposed.
it's quite interesting to me actually as well, the different class status. I mean, you mentioned how some of the members were quite high earning, quite what you would possibly typically say is high power or high status, right? And yet the commonality between them and, I don't know, someone who, like you said, may have been multiple rejections, attempts to secure gainful employment or whatever, that nonetheless loneliness can be a common thread, regardless of how successful someone may present from the outside. Oh, you've actually done quite well in terms of your career. Okay, maybe you don't have a girlfriend or maybe whatever, but like actually it's not as simple as get a good job and crack on at it. That doesn't sort of insure you or inure you against the possibility of falling foul or something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point that lots of people who find themselves within the far right or actively enjoying the far right come from all kinds of backgrounds. Not all of them are lonely, and just because you're lonely doesn't mean the next day you're going to go and start seek heiling. But certainly, it's a thread. It's a theme rather that I encountered quite a lot.
Is this, if we sort of zoom out a little bit more and try and contextualize the Basketweavers within the British far right more broadly, do you think this represents a trend towards professionalization, a slightly more elite, I guess the stereotypical sort of 80s National Front type football hooliganism image stereotype? Does an organization like the Basketweavers represent actually like a broader sea change that's happening within the movement?
Certainly, they show that far right groups can becoming maybe increasingly sophisticated. They enforce things like in their main group a ban on all online discussion that is not about organizing in-person events, entirely because they want to avoid an infiltrator like myself going in and seeing what they are up to. So they are like quite strict. Whenever members would start typing other stuff in the chat, they would delete it or get them to delete it really quickly. And again, this focus on like prioritizing offline meetups, that is relatively new. If you think back to groups like Patriotic Alternative, which a few years ago was like the big white nationalist group on the scene, they all had these group chats that were just awash with the vilest stuff. And again, their focus continues to be on online activity, which is something that people within the British far right are saying, like, maybe we should do fewer live streams and do more real stuff. And so that's kind of where the Basketweavers fit in. I suppose their commitment to staying off the media's radar, off anti-fascist radar, is something that a lot of other groups would share, but perhaps they have until now been able to actually achieve that in a way that other groups seeking members haven't.
How do you try and stop or successfully stop a movement then which operates in the way you just described, cloaks itself in irony, and seeks to deliberately operate within elite spaces that traditionally are quite hard to gain access to?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and scholars who have been researching the far right for decades, get asked this, and they're like, there's no silver bullet, but we believe that an organization that such as the Basketweavers, which which benefits from a lack of media attention, a lack of scrutiny, we think that potential members, people who might be interested in joining, should really have the full picture of what it is. Media organizations who are covering the people who are on its periphery should know exactly who they're dealing with when they're commissioning, a writer to write to do an op-ed piece to them, or appear as a talking head on their discussion show. Ultimately, it's going to be really hard to stop people from joining until we address the much bigger issues of loneliness in this country. And I don't think that I'm going to be the person to have the quick fix to why are men feeling disaffected and lonely in a giant capital city. But I do think that once we're aware of these issues and aware that things like Basketweavers even exist, we can start from there.
I could see like Guru Shukman out in
my next
out in, I don't know,
next
sort of
job.
like the Dales or somewhere doing like a Muay Thai camp for disaffected young men. Last couple of questions. If you could just talk a little bit about the risk, I guess, in covering it, because it's a balance that I consider both times you come on here, and you undoubtedly as an individual when you're writing your book or as part of your work at Hope Not Hate, that there is a risk of mythologizing, of glorifying is the wrong word, but in talking about them publicly, that like there are trade-offs. It's not without risk to do that. If you understand what I'm getting at.
Definitely. And for smaller groups or younger activists who might not cross a kind of sinister threshold, that is a decision that we do take. This what is this person's real world impact? Unfortunately, with a group with 1,300 members in the UK alone, that's increasing in influence, that's organising conferences not just in the UK but the US, Australia, Germany. I don't think we have the luxury of ignoring them, but trying to get that balance right of not making them seem like they are, the most dangerous thing in the world. Yeah, that's something that we're mindful of, and that's why we wanted to be. We're not hiding the fact that a lot of what they do is just meeting up in the pub. It does have a more sinister purpose, but of course, we ought to be clear about what they're actually up to.
Yeah. Finally then, so what should listeners, if you're thinking what you just said there, what they're actually up to, what should listeners take away when they are thinking about the type of threat that an organization like this can pose?
Yeah, I think that there are groups like the Basketweavers. They're not the only type of far right organization that is trying to target young people, but that there are very sophisticated efforts now by far right activists to try and expand and try and prey on the vulnerabilities of young people, and they're doing so in ways that are unfortunately quite successful, and that we have to try and get to grips with the fact that new forms of far right campaigning are emerging, and that we have to try and cover them, understand them, if we have any hope of disrupting them.
Harry Shukman, it's a pleasure to have you back in the studio. Thank you so much for taking the time. Year of the Rat out now, and I would implore listeners to keep an eye out for any of your future work on Hope Not Hate. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks very much.